Ambassador Kim Soo-jin felt her heart pound as she watched the numbers appear on the giant screen floating in front of her. 847 species had voted to kick Earth out of the Galactic Council. Only 12 had voted to keep them. 3 didn't vote at all. For 50 years, humans had been part of this great alliance of star-traveling civilizations. They had shared their music, their stories, their discoveries. Human scientists had helped cure diseases that had plagued alien worlds for centuries. Human engineers had built bridges and cities on distant planets. Human diplomats had prevented wars between species who had been enemies for thousands of years, but now it was over. High Counselor Vextar, a tall creature, with silver skin and 4 arms, stood at the center of the massive chamber. His voice echoed through the hall as he spoke the words that would change everything. "The human species has shown too much aggression," he declared. "They expand too fast. They ask too many questions. They refuse to follow our ancient ways. This threatens the peace we have built over millions of years." Soo-jin wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and remind everyone in that chamber of all the good things humans had done. When the plague hit the Centaurian colonies, who had worked day and night to find a cure? Humans. When the trade routes were attacked by pirates, who had volunteered their ships to protect innocent merchants? Humans. When the Outer Rim territories needed schools and hospitals, who had sent teachers and doctors without asking for payment? Humans. But she said nothing. She just stood there watching as her former friends turned away from her. The Centaurian ambassador, who had once called her sister, couldn't even look at her now. The Andromedan representative, who had laughed at her jokes during countless dinner parties, was already walking toward the exit. The Vegan delegate, who had once praised human creativity, was studying his tablet as if she didn't exist. "All trade agreements are cancelled," Vextar continued. "No more sharing of technology, no more travel permits for human ships in council space. You have 30 days to remove all human presence from our territories." Security guards in their gleaming armor began moving toward Soo-jin. She knew they would escort her out of the building, probably straight to a ship that would take her back to Earth. She would never see this place again, never walk these halls where she had spent the best years of her life trying to build bridges between species. But as the guards got closer, something strange happened inside her. Instead of sadness or fear, she felt something else growing in her chest. Determination, anger, yes, but also hope. She straightened her back and lifted her chin. If they wanted her to leave with dignity, she would give them dignity. She walked past the guards before they could grab her arms. She moved through the chamber like a queen, not a prisoner. As she reached the door, she touched the small device on her collar. It would send her message directly to Earth, to the President, to the military commanders, to anyone who needed to hear it. "This isn't the end," she whispered, her words traveling faster than light across the galaxy. "This is just the beginning." The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, sealing her out of the only political home she had ever known. But Kim Soo-jin smiled as she walked toward her ship. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. President Lee Min-ho stood before the largest gathering of world leaders in human history. Every seat in the United Earth Assembly was filled. Representatives from every nation, every colony, every space station had come to hear what he would say. The giant screens behind him showed something that made everyone's heart ache. Pictures of human settlements scattered across the galaxy, places that millions of people called home. "My fellow humans," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "3 days ago we were expelled from the Galactic Council. Today we must decide who we are going to be." The screens changed, showing families packing their belongings on distant worlds. Children who had never seen Earth were being forced to leave the only homes they had ever known. Entire cities built by human hands would soon be empty. "We can do one of 2 things," the president continued. "We can accept their decision, we can pull back to Earth, close our borders, and spend the rest of our lives wondering what we could have been. Or we can show them what happens when you try to cage the human spirit." In orbit around Mars, Admiral Han Ji-woo was already putting the president's words into action. The largest evacuation in human history was underway. Every day, thousands of ships lifted off from human colonies throughout Council space. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, military vessels, even converted mining ships. Anything that could carry people and supplies was pressed into service. The Admiral watched the constant stream of ships on his command screen. Each dot represented hundreds or thousands of lives being uprooted. Families who had spent generations building new worlds were leaving everything behind. "Sir," his aide reported, "the colony ships from New Shanghai are requesting escort through the Rigel sector. Council patrols have been harassing civilian vessels. Send the Third Fleet," Han ordered. "No one touches our people." Meanwhile, on the Council homeworld, Dr. Park Yuna was fighting a different kind of battle. She had only hours left before her access to the vast Council scientific databases would be cut off forever. Her fingers flew across multiple keyboards as she downloaded everything she could: medical research, engineering blueprints, star charts, anything that might help humanity survive on its own. "Warning," the computer announced. "Access will be terminated in 60 minutes. Yuna didn't even look up. Every second counted now. Centuries of scientific knowledge that humans had helped create was about to be locked away from them forever. But she was determined to save as much as possible. Captain Cho Sung-min guided his massive colony ship through the last checkpoint at the edge of Council space. Behind him, 50,000 colonists from the agricultural world of New Jeju were starting their journey into the unknown. Children pressed their faces against the windows, watching their birth planet shrink to a tiny dot. "Captain," his navigator called out, "we're officially in uncharted space now. Where exactly are we heading?" It was a good question. The convoy of refugee ships stretched as far as sensors could detect, all following Admiral Han's lead ship towards a region of the galaxy that appeared as blank space on most star charts. "Beyond their reach," Admiral Han's voice crackled over the communication system. "The outer spiral. It's wild space out there, but it's ours now." The captain looked at the star charts showing their destination. It was a place the Council had never bothered to explore, considering it too far from their core worlds to be worth the effort. Perfect for a species that had just been told they weren't welcome in civilized space. "Sir," his daughter asked, tugging at his uniform, "will we ever go home?" Cho Sung-min knelt down and smiled at her. "We're not running away, little one. We're going to build a new home, a better home." Captain Lee Da-eun had seen many beautiful sights during her years exploring space, but nothing had prepared her for the Kepler cluster. Through the view screen of her survey ship, dozens of star systems sparkled like jewels scattered across black velvet. Each point of light represented possibilities: new worlds, new homes, new beginnings for the millions of humans searching for a place to call their own. "Preliminary scans are incredible," reported her science officer, wiping sweat from his forehead. Despite the cool air on the bridge, 17 habitable planets in this cluster alone, and the mineral readings. He paused, checking his instruments again. "Captain, some of these worlds are sitting on fortunes. Rare metals, energy crystals, elements we've only dreamed of mining." Da-eun studied the data flowing across her screens. The Council had thousands of years to explore this region, but they had ignored it completely. Too far from their core worlds, they had decided. Not worth the effort to claim officially. Their loss was about to become humanity's greatest gain. "That one," she said, pointing to a world that glowed blue and green like Earth itself. 3 moons danced around it in perfect harmony. "Send the detailed scans to Admiral Han. Tell him, we found our new capital." Within weeks, the first colony ships arrived. The world they named New Seoul became a hive of activity as prefabricated buildings rose from the grassy plains. Construction robots worked alongside human engineers to build what would become the first major human city outside Council space. The settlement grew so fast that supply ships arrived to find new neighborhoods that hadn't existed during their previous visit. But the humans quickly discovered they weren't the only intelligent life in the Kepler cluster. The Zephyrians were unlike any species humans had encountered before. They looked like living clouds, their bodies shifting between solid and gas as they moved. They communicated through colors that rippled across their translucent forms, and their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Most importantly, they were peaceful to their very core, which had made them perfect victims for the Council's greed. "We have lived here for over 1,000 of your years," Elder Whisperwind explained to Captain Lee during their first meeting. The ancient Zephyrian's form shimmered with sad blue hues as he spoke. The council came 50 of your years ago. They said we must pay taxes for protection we never asked for. They took our young to work in their mines. They took our crystals to power their ships. We are not warriors. We did not know how to say no. Da-Yun felt anger rising in her chest. It was the same story they had heard from other species, the council using their military might to bully peaceful civilizations into submission. But this time would be different. When the council tax collectors arrived at the Zephyrian homeworld 3 months later, they expected to find the usual scene, frightened natives ready to hand over whatever the council demanded. Instead, they found human defensive satellites protecting the planet and human ships patrolling the system. This territory is now under human protection. Admiral Han's voice crackled through their communication systems. Turn around and leave, or we will. Consider your presence an act of aggression. The tax collectors, used to easy victories against defenseless targets, quickly retreated rather than face a fight they weren't prepared for. Elder Whisperwind approached Captain Lee the next day, his form now glowing with warm golden colors that humans had learned meant happiness and gratitude. Your people stood with us when we were too weak to stand alone, he said, his voice carrying the sound of celebration. For the first time in decades, my children sleep without fear. We had forgotten what freedom felt like, but you have reminded us. That day marked the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history, an alliance based not on conquest or tribute, but on mutual respect and protection. The Zephyrians offered their knowledge of the local systems and their unique abilities to process certain minerals. In return, humans offered protection and friendship. Word spread quickly through the outer spiral. There was a new power rising, one that protected the weak instead of exploiting them. Dr. Kim Jae-sung never thought he would become one of the galaxy's most wanted criminals. Just 2 years ago, he had been a simple medical officer running supply missions to refugee camps along the council borders. His job was supposed to be easy: deliver medicine, treat the sick, and return to base. But everything changed the day he met Hisek. The reptilian Scolari had approached him at a refugee camp on the edge of council space. Hisek's green scales were dull with exhaustion, and his large yellow eyes held a desperation that Kim had seen too often in recent months, Doctor. Hisek had whispered, glancing around nervously. My family, we cannot stay here. The council will send us back to the labor camps. My younglings will die there. Kim had heard the stories. The Scolari were natural miners, their clawed hands perfect for digging in tight spaces. The council had decided this made them perfect for the dangerous crystal mines on the edge of their territory. Families were separated. Children as young as 5 were forced to work, and anyone who complained simply disappeared. Where can you go? Kim had asked, though he already knew the answer. We heard rumors, Hisek said, his voice barely audible. They say humans accept anyone who asks for help. They say you judge people by their actions, not their species. That conversation had started everything. Kim couldn't officially help. His medical mission had strict rules about not getting involved in politics, but he could accidentally leave. His cargo bay unlocked when he docked at certain stations. He could develop mechanical problems that required emergency stops in human territory. He could misfile his passenger manifests. Another transport tonight, Hisek whispered to him now 2 years later. They met in the shadows behind a supply depot on a neutral trading station. 3 families, including younglings. The council is starting to ask questions about missing workers. Kim nodded, checking his watch. His medical supply run to the refugee camps would provide perfect cover. His ship would be loaded with legitimate supplies, and the council rarely searched medical vessels thoroughly. But tonight, hidden in specially modified cargo containers, 3 Scolari families would begin their journey to freedom. The usual route? Kim asked. Yes, the mining station at Kepler 7, then transfer to the passenger liner. Captain No Young-suk knows to expect them. The network had grown far beyond what Kim had ever imagined. What started as one doctor helping one family had become an underground railroad stretching across dozens of star systems. Human merchants, ship captains, station managers, and even some sympathetic aliens worked together to help those fleeing. Council oppression. Captain No ran passenger services between human colonies, but his ships always seemed to have a few extra passengers who didn't appear on any official records. Engineer Bai In-suk modified cargo containers to carry people safely instead of supplies. Trader Park Kyung-ho used his legitimate business routes to move refugees through council checkpoints without suspicion. The council had branded them all as criminals. Human smuggling ring threatens galactic stability, screamed the headlines. So on council news networks, wanted posters with Kim's face appeared on stations throughout council space, offering massive rewards for information leading to his capture. But for every refugee who found safety in human territory, 10 more heard the story and began their own dangerous journey toward freedom. The underground network grew stronger with each successful rescue. "Doctor," Hisek said, pulling out a small datapad, "these are the coordinates for the new safe house on Vega Station, and this is a list of species requesting extraction from Sector 12. Kim looked at the list and felt his heart sink. Hundreds of names, representing thousands of individuals and families desperate to escape council oppression. Children separated from parents, workers trapped in dangerous conditions, entire communities facing forced relocation. "We can't save them all," he said quietly. "No," Hisek agreed, his scales shifting to a determined shade of blue. "But every person we save makes the network stronger. Every refugee becomes a voice telling others that humans keep their promises. Every friend we make is proof that the council's way is not the only way." Kim smiled and tucked the datapad into his medical kit. Tonight, 3 more families would taste freedom. Tomorrow, he would start planning to save 3 more. Engineer Song Mi-young hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks. Her eyes were red from staring at computer screens, her hands were stained with machine oil, and her coffee mug had become a permanent extension of her arm. But she refused to give up on the prototype sitting in front of her. The quantum drive looked like a disaster. Wires hung out at odd angles, makeshift components were held together with industrial tape, and it hummed with an unhealthy vibration. That made everyone nervous. This was her 3rd attempt to build something better than council technology, and just like the first 2, it seemed destined for failure. "Maybe we should try a different approach," suggested her assistant, eyeing the sparking contraption warily. "The council has had thousands of years to perfect their drives. That's exactly the problem," Mi-young replied, wiping grease from her forehead. "They've been using the same basic design for so long, they've forgotten there might be better ways to do things." She pulled up the stolen council technical specifications on her screen. Human spies had risked their lives to get this information before Earth was expelled from the council. The drive systems were impressive, but they were also incredibly wasteful. They used massive amounts of energy to punch holes through space-time, like using a sledgehammer to crack an egg. "Look at this," Mi-young said, pointing to the energy consumption charts. "Their drives need the power output of a small star just to move a single ship. They compensate by building bigger reactors, heavier ships, more complex systems. It's madness." Her team had been trying for months to copy the council's approach, but they kept running into the same problem. They didn't have access to the exotic materials that made council drives possible. Rare crystals that could only be mined from the cores of dead stars, metals that required centuries to synthesize in specialized facilities, components that cost more than entire human colonies. But what if they didn't need any of that? The breakthrough came at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Mi-young had been lying on the floor of her workshop, staring at the ceiling and thinking about ocean waves. How did water move with such incredible efficiency? How did dolphins slice through the sea with barely any effort, while human submarines struggled against every current? The answer was elegance over force. She jumped up and began frantically redesigning the drive core. Instead of trying to smash through the fabric of space, what if they could convince it to bend gently? Instead of overwhelming the quantum fields with raw power, what if they could whisper to them instead of shouting? "Mi-young, it's 3 in the morning, her assistant complained when she called the entire team back to the lab. "This better be important." "We've been thinking about this all wrong," she explained excitedly as her bleary-eyed team gathered around her workstation. "We don't need to be stronger than the council. We need to be smarter." The new design was beautiful in its simplicity. Where Council drives used brute force, the human version used precision. Where they consumed massive amounts of energy, the new drive sipped power like a hummingbird drinking nectar. Most importantly, it could be built with materials that humans could actually acquire. The first test flight left everyone speechless. The journey that should have taken 6 hours was completed in just over 1 hour. The energy consumption was so low that the ship's reactor was running at only 30% capacity. "How is this possible?" whispered the test pilot as he docked back at the space station. Meanwhile, across the human colonies, biologist Yu Hyun-sik was achieving his own miracles. The Council's terraforming technology was like everything else they built. Massive, expensive, and slow. They would bombard planets with engineered bacteria, dump chemicals into the atmosphere, and wait decades for results. Hyun-sik had taken a completely different approach. Instead of fighting against a planet's natural systems, he worked with them. He studied how life had evolved on Earth, how ecosystems balanced themselves, how plants and animals created the conditions that other species needed to thrive. His first success was a dead rock called Kepler 9. The Council would have spent 50 years and billions of credits trying to make it habitable. Hyun-sik's method took 18 months and cost less than a single Council terraforming robot. He introduced carefully selected microorganisms that began breaking down the rocky surface into soil, plants genetically modified to thrive in harsh conditions followed, their roots breaking up more rock while their leaves began producing oxygen. Within a year, the first rains fell on a world that had been dry for millions of years. "The secret," he explained to his amazed colleagues, "is that nature already knows how to create perfect environments. We just have to give it a little help and get out of the way." News of these breakthroughs spread throughout human space like wildfire. Ships that could outrun Council vessels by massive margins. Worlds transformed from lifeless rocks to garden paradises in record time. The species that had been expelled for being too primitive was suddenly looking very advanced indeed. General Nam Do-hyun stood in the command center of New Seoul's orbital defense station, staring at the holographic display that showed the entire Kepler cluster. Green dots represented human colonies, blue ones showed allied species settlements, and the empty space between them would soon become the most dangerous region in the galaxy. "Sir, the intelligence reports are getting worse," his aide reported, handing him a data tablet. "Council military buildup in the border sectors has increased by 300% in the last month. They're not even trying to hide it anymore." Do-hyun had seen this coming from the moment humans started accepting refugees and building their own trade networks. The Council had expelled humanity, expecting them to disappear quietly into the outer darkness. Instead, humans had built something that was starting to look like a real threat to Council authority. "They'll come," he told his assembled staff officers. "The only question is when and how. We need to be ready for anything." The problem was that humans couldn't fight the Council using traditional methods. The Council had millions of ships, armies that had conquered thousands of worlds, and weapons that could destroy entire star systems. They had been the dominant military power in the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. But humans had something the Council had forgotten. About creativity. "Forget everything you know about space warfare," Do-hyun announced to his planning committee. "The Council expects us to build massive battle stations and fight them ship to ship. That's exactly what we're not going to do. Instead of building a few giant targets, humans began constructing hundreds of small mobile defense platforms throughout their territory. Each one was barely larger than a fighter craft, but they could coordinate with each other to create defensive networks that covered entire star systems. The Zephyrians contributed their ability to phase in and out of normal space, making them perfect for hit-and-run attacks. The Scalari used their natural mining skills to hollow out asteroids and turn them into hidden weapons platforms. Even the peaceful Andromedans offered their expertise in sensor technology, creating early warning systems that could detect Council ships long before they reached human space. "It's like fighting smoke," explained Commander Yoon Sang-woo as he demonstrated the new tactics to a group of Allied officers. "They can't hit what they can't catch, and they can't catch what they don't understand." The first test came sooner than expected. Council probe ships began appearing at the edge of human territory, testing defenses and gathering intelligence. These weren't full military vessels, just fast scouts meant to slip in, take readings, and report back to the main fleet. They found something completely unlike anything in their tactical databases. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported. The sensor operator on the bridge of the scout ship, Council's eye. I'm not sure what it is, sir. The signature doesn't match any known human ship design. Before the captain could respond, their ship was surrounded by dozens of small craft that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Some flickered in and out, of visibility like ghosts. Others emerged from what looked like empty space, but turned out to be camouflaged asteroids. A few seemed to be flying in formation, with creatures that definitely weren't machines. "This is Admiral Han Ji-woo of the Human Defense Force," came the transmission. "You are in violation of our territorial boundaries. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The council captain had orders to test human defenses, but this wasn't what his commanders had prepared him for. His ship was outnumbered 50 to 1 by craft using technologies and tactics he had never encountered. Worse, his sensors were picking up similar concentrations of defenders throughout the entire system. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "I'm reading defensive installations on every major asteroid, hidden bases in the gas giant's rings, and what appears to be a mobile command center that keeps changing position. This entire star system is a fortress." The scout ship retreated, but not before its sensors had recorded everything they encountered. The data they brought back to Council headquarters painted a disturbing picture. Humans hadn't just built defenses. They had turned entire regions of space into killing fields that would be nightmares to assault. "How many ships would we need to take just one of their systems?" asked High Counselor Vextar as he reviewed the intelligence reports. "Based on these readings, sir," replied the military advisor, "we would need to commit at least a third of the entire Council fleet. And that's assuming these are their only defenses." But the humans were just getting started. Engineer Song Mi-young had been working on more than just faster ship drives. Her team had developed weapons that could phase through Council armor, sensors that could track cloaked ships, and defensive shields that actually got stronger when attacked. Meanwhile, General Nam Do-hyun was coordinating with resistance movements throughout Council space. Every refugee who reached human territory brought valuable intelligence about Council military installations and troop movements. Every allied species contributed new ideas for unconventional warfare. "They want a war," Do-hyun said as he watched the latest reports of Council fleet movements. "But it's going to be unlike any war they've ever fought. They're used to conquering primitive species with overwhelming force. Let's see how they handle fighting an enemy that refuses to play by their rules." The galaxy was about to learn that cornered humans were the most dangerous humans of all. The message arrived simultaneously on every human world, space station, and ship throughout the outer spiral. High Counselor Vextar's silver face filled. Screens from the bustling markets of New Seoul to the mining colonies on the edge of the galaxy. His forearms were crossed in the traditional Galactic Council pose of absolute authority, and his eyes glowed with barely contained fury. "People of the former Earth territories," he began, his voice echoing with the weight of ancient power, "you have violated every principle of galactic order. You harbor criminals and dissidents. You disrupt legitimate trade. You spread dangerous ideas of rebellion throughout civilized space." President Lee Min-ho watched the broadcast from his office in the New Seoul Capitol building. Around him, his advisors and cabinet members sat in tense silence. They had all known this moment would come eventually, but seeing it happen still sent chills down their spines. "You have 48 standard hours to cease all refugee operations," Vextar continued. "Surrender all dissidents currently in your territory. Dissolve your illegal trade networks. Return to your designated boundaries and accept isolation as the price of your past aggression." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone knew what came next. Failure to comply will result in military action to restore galactic stability. The full might of the Galactic Council will be brought to bear against your rebellion. This is your final warning. The screen went dark, leaving the room in heavy silence. Outside the windows, the 3 moons of New Seoul continued their eternal dance, beautiful and peaceful. It was hard to believe that within days, this world might become a battlefield. President Lee stood and walked to his communications panel. If the Council wanted to broadcast ultimatums, he could play that game too. Within minutes, his response was being transmitted throughout human space and beyond, carried by the underground networks that now connected half the galaxy. "Citizens of the free territories," he began, his voice calm but determined. "The Council demands that we surrender refugees who came to us seeking safety. They want us to abandon allies who chose freedom over oppression. They ask us to deny the basic rights that make us human." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "We harbor no dissidents, only free beings choosing their own destiny. We will not surrender those who trust us. We will not abandon our principles. And we will not bow to threats from those who have forgotten what freedom means." The response was immediate and overwhelming. On every human world, people took to the streets in peaceful demonstrations of support. Alien refugees publicly declared their loyalty to their new homes. Even some Council worlds saw protests as citizens demanded to know why their government was threatening to start the largest war in galactic history. But the real action was happening in space, where Admiral Han Jiwoo watched the largest military build-up he had ever seen. Council ships poured into the border sectors by the thousands. Massive battleships that could crack planets, carrier vessels filled with fighter craft, troop transports carrying armies that had conquered entire star systems. "Sir, final count is in," reported Commander Shin Bora from her position at the tactical station. 3,000 capital ships, 15,000 support vessels, and over 1 million fighter craft. It's the largest fleet the Council has assembled in over 2 centuries. Han studied the formation data, streaming across his screens. The Council had pulled ships from every corner of their territory, stripping defenses from dozens of sectors to create this overwhelming force. They clearly intended to end human resistance with one decisive blow, but something didn't look right. "Commander, analyze the fleet composition," Han ordered. "Show me which worlds those ships are from." The data appeared on his display, and Han felt his pulse quicken. Nearly half the ships in the Council fleet came from worlds that had been secretly trading with humans for months. Centaurian cruisers whose crews had grown rich selling goods in human markets. Andromedan science vessels whose researchers had collaborated on joint projects. Vegan transport ships that had carried refugees to safety. "Sir," Bora said quietly, "do you think they'll actually fire on species they've been working with?" It was a good question. The Council had always maintained unity through fear and overwhelming force. They had never faced a situation where their own military might be divided in its loyalties. Han activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Han. The Council fleet has taken position at our borders. They outnumber us 10 to 1, and their firepower could glass every world in human space." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in throughout the human fleet. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Half the ships in that fleet belong to species who have traded with us, worked with us, and learned that humans keep their promises. The question isn't whether we can win a fight against those odds. The question is whether there will be a fight at all. Throughout human space, millions of people held their breath and waited to see if the galaxy was about to tear itself apart. The moment that changed galactic history happened at exactly 1427 Standard Time on what would later be called Liberation Day. Admiral Han Jiwoo was watching the massive Council fleet advance toward human space when his communications officer suddenly straightened in her chair. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Council fleet. It's coming from one of their ships." The voice that crackled through the speakers belonged to Captain Mordeth, a Centaurian officer whose ship had been trading secretly with humans for over a year. His crew had grown wealthy, selling goods in human markets, and more importantly, they had grown to respect the way humans conducted business. "This is Captain Mordeth of the Centaurian vessel Star Lance," the transmission began. "My crew and I have discussed our orders, and we cannot in good conscience fire upon beings who have treated us with nothing but fairness and respect. We stand with humanity." Before Admiral Han could respond, the Star Lance broke formation and began moving toward human lines. Within minutes, other ships followed. First a handful, then dozens, Then hundreds of vessels began abandoning the Council fleet. "This is Commander Zixara of the Andromedan science vessel. Deep thought," came another transmission. "Our research partnerships with human scientists have led to breakthroughs that will benefit the entire galaxy. We will not destroy such valuable cooperation." Vegan trader. "Peaceful prophet requesting permission to join human forces," announced another captain. "Human merchants have treated us better in 6 months than the Council has in 60 years, Admiral." Han watched in amazement as nearly half the Council fleet began defecting to the human side. Ships that had been ordered to destroy human civilization were instead seeking sanctuary with their former targets. "All vessels requesting sanctuary, you are welcome in human space," Han broadcast to the growing stream of defectors. "We judge beings by their actions, not their origins." High Counselor Vextar's voice roared across all communication channels as he watched his mighty fleet falling apart. "This is mutiny. Return to formation immediately or face charges of treason." But his words fell on deaf ears. The crews of the defecting ships had made their choice, and they were choosing freedom over fear. On New Sol, President Lee Min-ho realized that this was the moment to seize the initiative. He activated the emergency broadcast system that would carry his words to every inhabited world in the galaxy. "Citizens of all species, wherever you may be," he began, his voice reaching billions of beings across thousands of star systems. "Today marks the end of an old order built on oppression and the beginning of something new. Today, we invite all species to join a new galactic commonwealth built on equality, mutual respect, and the right of all beings to determine their own destiny." The response was immediate and overwhelming. On Council worlds throughout the galaxy, entire populations rose up in peaceful revolution. Governments that had ruled through fear for millennia found themselves facing citizens who had suddenly remembered what freedom looked like. The Scolari homeworld declared independence within hours, followed by the Zephyrian colonies, the Andromedan, research stations, and dozens of other species who had suffered under Council rule. Even some core worlds began questioning why they should continue supporting a system that had just tried to start the largest war in galactic history. "Sir," Commander Shin Bo-Ra reported to Admiral Han, "we're receiving surrender requests from the remaining Council ships. Their crews are refusing to fight, and several commanders are requesting asylum." What had begun as the largest military invasion in galactic history had become the largest peaceful surrender in galactic history. The Council's attempt to crush human rebellion had instead sparked the liberation of half the galaxy. On the bridge of his flagship, High Counselor Vextar watched his empire crumble in real time. Species after species was abandoning the Council to join the new Commonwealth. Entire fleets were switching sides. Worlds that had paid tribute for centuries were declaring independence. "How did this happen?" he asked his remaining advisors, but they had no answers. They had never imagined that their victims might prefer partnership to domination. Within a month, the old Galactic Council had collapsed completely. The Commonwealth grew rapidly as species chose cooperation over conquest, fair trade over exploitation, and freedom over fear. The humans who had been banished as a threat to galactic stability had become the foundation of a new order that was more stable and prosperous than anything the galaxy had seen before. President Lee stood on the balcony of his office, looking up at the stars that now belonged to a free galaxy. What had begun as humanity's darkest hour had become the dawn of a new age for everyone. "From exile to empire," he murmured to himself, then smiled. "Though I suppose calling it an empire misses the point entirely. The galaxy had tried to cage the human spirit, and had instead learned what happens when freedom is given room to grow. The future belonged to all species now, working together as equals under the stars."